Hello, everybody. Welcome to the final episode of The Burnt Out Practice Owner. And if you're listening on one of your listening devices only, you may want to also go to YouTube and check this out because I am actually showing visuals. I'm showing slides because this is the compilation of survey results. I went and surveyed folks in the Chicagoland therapist groups on Facebook and got 56 employees to respond. So just, I guess self-disclosure, this is not a very, I'm not a researcher by heart, but I did want to compile some information that helps both practice owners and employees better understand what's happening in the relationships between one another. What is happening for employees that they like and don't like? What can employers change? What needs to stay the same? All that stuff, right? So while this is the final episode of the Burnt Out Practice Owner, I do have some things up my sleeve that I will be sharing with you at the end of this presentation. But what I really want this to be today is I am speaking both to practice owners and to employees. I imagine there's probably also people out there who are thinking of becoming practice owners or maybe thinking of becoming employees at private practices. So I am speaking to all of you because what I really want is for everything to become more open and transparent and just put everything on the table. And then we better know what we're in for and what we're not in for, right? So without further ado, let me dig into the jazz. If you want to download a copy of the slides, I have put them up on a service called Gumroad. So you can go to sarahhbt.gumroad.com/L/burnout survey. This was pretty time intensive to put together, as you will see as we go along. So for that reason, I've put the slides up on Gumroad because I am asking if you would mind sharing a little bit of money for the labor that I have put into this. So the suggested donation is $7, but you can literally give as little as $1, or you can probably also even download them for free if you like. But anything that you would be willing to give me for all this work is deeply appreciated. So if you do not know who I am, hi, I'm Sarah, and I was a practice owner. Head Heart Therapy was the name of my practice. I started in 2013, and I sold it in 2023 to the amazing executive director, Rael Grayson. So if you haven't heard my interview with her, make sure you check that out on the Burnt Out Practice Owner. I now work as a group practice consultant under Head Heart Business Therapy, and I really, really am passionate about helping practice owners stay sane while trying to create equitable businesses that are actually helpful for their employees as well. If you're listening to this on your podcast app, you already know that I'm a podcast host of Conversations with a Wounded Healer. It's almost been 7 years now, I think. I don't know. Time. What is time anymore? And I'm also an adjunct professor at Loyola University. So pleased to meet you. Now let's get into the survey. It's a rough time to be a practice owner. And I started the Burnt Out Practice Owner series to try to support practice owners who were really going through the struggle. And when I started that endeavor, there was a big part of me that's like, employees have it all wrong. They don't know what they're talking about. If they just knew how the business is run, then everything would be better. But as I was working on, as I've been actually doing consulting and working with practice owners, hearing more stories, I started to realize, oh, maybe practice owners aren't perfect. And when I think about my own experience and my learning curve, I know that I was anything from perfect and caused a lot of harm to my staff while I was trying to figure out how to be a business owner. So, spoiler alert, there are a lot of unaddressed issues for both practice owners and employees. And you'll see what I mean as we dig into the data. So what made me really want to explore the employee side was seeing a lot of disgruntled employees do anonymous posts on Facebook. And I wanted to know, is it them? Is it just them? Or is there something actually going on with the practice owners? So I just wanted to dig a little bit deeper and also challenge some of the assumptions that I had going into this. You know, if I'm only talking to one side of the group, I realized I was missing 50% of the picture. So I wanted to hear from the quote unquote other side. And small business is hard. It has always been hard, and I think it's particularly hard right now. And a lot of the practice owners that I work with really, really want to make wonderful, healthy spaces for their staff. But it's going to take everybody to make that happen. And so this survey is a part of seeing how we can band together to do it a little bit differently. All right, so on to the questions. So I wanted to find out the demographics of the employees, what their licensure was, how long they've been in the field, the previous experience that they had, the demographics of the practice. So size, age, location of the practice, wages and benefits. What was it that employees are looking for versus what they have? Self-inquiry. I wanted to understand better about how prepared employees were for private practice, their insights into how the business operates, and what they might do if they were in the owner's position. And then the last theme of questions were social conditions. So some of the questions asked the respondents to think about what's going on in the larger world that might be impacting their feelings, like politics, economics, healthcare costs, labor strikes, marginalization. And so overall, there were 30 questions around these themes. So now let's see who it was that responded. So as I mentioned before, there were 56 therapists who responded to this anonymous survey, and I asked everyone if they would be willing to have follow-up conversations. Only a very small amount of those did, and I did end up having follow-up conversations with 6 of the respondents. So license type, we've got basically almost half and half social workers and counselors, with a handful of PsyDs and marriage and family therapists. The license status. So this was my first assumption that was busted. My practice owning friends and I have always thought that everybody who was complaining about not being happy in group practice were all pre-licensed clinicians who had never had a job before. As you can see from the data here, that is actually completely wrong. While 27% of the folks who responded were pre-licensed, 73%, so almost 3/4 of the people who responded are actually have had their licensure for at least several years. And so then we get into graduation years. It starts with one person who graduated in 1999, all the way up to just last year in 2023. Most of the respondents end up being from 2017 to 2023. So while there are folks who definitely have their license, it looks like the data skews that most folks have been in the field, let's see, 4, 3, 2, 1, 20, 19, 18, 17, within the last 8 years. This was another myth busted for me. My belief that most of the disgruntled employees had not worked in other settings before joining private practice. But this question asking, did you hold a job before joining private practice? 70% of respondents said yes. 30% only are people who went straight from grad school into private practice. And when I asked why did people go into private practice, the most cited reason was financial, right? So this begins to set up the disgruntled employee dichotomy between the wages that are expected versus the reality of the wages, right? I think generally, if you ask therapists where they can make the most money, everybody is probably going to say private practice. But what some of the respondees have come to recognize is that maybe that isn't actually true. So some other reasons people wanted to go into private practice, they wanted to have more autonomy and flexibility. They said they experienced burnout and other concerns in the environments that they were working in, community mental health or other places. And then specialization and client focus. So some folks wanted to pursue really specific clinical interests or work with specific populations. And so that is why folks wanted to go into private practice. And now for the practice info for which these places work. So as we can see, I asked how many employees work at the practice, and less than 5%, or actually 5% had less than 4 people at the practice. 32% had 4 to 9 employees at the practice. 23% had 10 to 15 employees at the practice. 21% had 16 to 25 employees, and 18% had over 25 employees at the practice. And then how long the practice has been in operation, 4% said they don't know. No respondent said that was less than a year. 11% said 1 to 2 years. 20% said 3 to 5 years, and then more than 10 years was 23%, and 5 to 10 years was 43%. So I asked about the amount of employees and the years in operation to better understand the problems that employees were talking about. So newer practices could potentially be offering wages that are higher and make employees happier in the short run, but could potentially be unsustainable at the practice. So that's one of the things I was sort of considering, is if we had a lot of employees at practices that have been around longer, they may be less happy with wages because the practices have been doing this for a minute, and so they know how to make sure that this is sustainable. So, it all depends on the needs of the employees, right? Now for expected wages. So practice owners, hold your breath. This is where we get fun. So if you're looking at the slide and totaling everything up, 89.4% of respondents responded in these buckets, and then the extra 10.6 respondents are on the next slide. So we have 5.4% expect to collect between 50 and 55% of insurance reimbursement. 26.8% would like to see 56 to 60% of the collected insurance payments, or however people are getting paid. 51.8% would like to see 61 to 70% of the collected payments. And then 5.4% said that they would like to see above 70% of the collected payments. So what I find super interesting about these numbers is that if you're a practice owner and you've been doing it for a minute, it's pretty standard to offer between 50 and 55% commission on whatever's collected, right? But only 5.4% of employees who responded believe that that's fair. Right? So more than half believe that they should be receiving between 61 and 70%. So, okay, here's the kicker to employees who are listening. My consultant, Aggie Tajinski, and I did an Instagram live where if you go to my Instagram, Head Heart Biz Therapy, you can see it. It's pinned to the top of my profile. We broke down the actual percentage of wages plus benefits that employees get. So basically, when you add up wages, employee tax that the owner pays, health benefits, 401k benefits, CE stipend, et cetera, it actually comes out to, I think it was 71%, but we'll just say 70 to be fair. So for any employees who are listening and disappointed to hear this, it's not cash, right? Everybody wants their paycheck to be larger, but I think it's really, really important for employees to recognize that the money that goes directly to them and not to the business is around 70%, right? And this, of course, everything is malleable depending on how many benefits get offered. But when you add up all of that, right, how much the employees get, how much overhead there is, the business profit only tends to be between 5 and 10% for the owners, depending on specifics. So, one thing that I hear a lot of the time that employees think that, practice owners are just rolling in it and they have all this dough. there is profit from practices, and I don't think anybody is, trying to say that there's not. But the amount of work that happens for just this 5 or 10%, may or may not be worth it, right? Depending on who you are as a practice owner. So this wage gap here is one area where if employers can help educate their staff on where the money goes, how much of it is actually going to them as individuals, how much of it is going to run the business, that could potentially help to tamper some of the upset that happens for some folks. So some other suggestions, this is the other 10.6% of the ideas that were shared. So somebody recommended that wages should depend on the experience. If somebody has worked for 10 or more years, it should be more than 70%. Somebody suggested 70% after being fully licensed. Somebody wild said 80%. And then someone else shared a tiered rate between 45 and 60%, which is actually head heart, at least what we did when I was there, we did a range between 45 and I think it was 70%, a tiered rate based on how many that people see. So practice owners know that insurance reimbursement rates are fixed. So employee income is dependent on the receivables, right? So people who are hoping that, you can be paid more based on experience and that sort of thing, unfortunately, because insurance doesn't work that way, it's really challenging for practice owners to try to run their business that way. But some ways that I've heard practice owners give higher wages. One that is not very sustainable is for the practice owner to see a ton of clients so that their salary isn't necessarily dependent on what other people are making. But they're sort of making their own salary by seeing their clients. And it might sound like a good idea in the short term, but I fear it actually would only increase burnout for owners and leave the employees undermanaged and undersupported. Other things are, female practice owners and practice owners who are people of color could apply for like women-owned or POC-owned business designation, which means that you can get grants for certain things. So that's a way to have money come in. Doing trainings for corporations, right? Doing some mental health support trainings, that can be another way to bring in money. But it's still always going to be incumbent on the therapist seeing clients. So tiered rates, like this option of paying between 45 and 60%, that seems to be a decent alternative to the fixed rate. But of course, again, it's still incumbent on employees seeing seeing a certain amount of clients. So the difference between not-for-profit or corporations, right? So bigger organizations versus small business, it's really, really evident when we talk about tenure and wages, right? So if you were at a hospital job or a seasoned not-for-profit job, they generally pay you a salary and give you a minimum like cost of living wage increase every year, right? So when you have more employees, the burden is more widely distributed, right? So that's why it's easier for larger corporations or for businesses that have been around a really long time who have a lot of employees to make these sorts of things possible. Also to add, not-for-profits often have donors as well. So those donations or those grants that come in can bridge the gaps when a business might be cash poor. So small business just doesn't have this number. They just don't have the number of employees. And so you may see larger practices, right? I'm not going to name any names, but there are a lot of larger practices in the Chicagoland group practice landscape that do offer higher wages, but it's because they have a lot of employees performing at the rate that they're supposed to perform that spreads out the risk to everybody. But when you have only 5 employees and one of them is not seeing the target amount of clients, you can see how that is more easy to drag down the whole business than if you've got a lot of people who are performing. So that's just one thing that employees can really think about when they're trying to look at like, what's the best fit for me? Because it's not always the practice that pays the most. Okay. Next question I asked was, what helps you discern a fair wage? So some notes that came up with this, the highest amount of responses was people saying that the market and or social comparison, right? So asking their friends or, other people, what they were paid. So the social comparison has been a really tough issue to crack, because I can tell you that on the Chicagoland Group Practice Owner Facebook page, we keep banging our head against the wall saying, who is it out there that is paying 70%? Because we can't compete with you guys. Like, who is doing this? So truthfully, like, I don't know what practices are paying that amount. So it's really, really hard, because small businesses can choose to pay whatever the hell they want to attract talent, right? And it gets really confusing for employees, because it's impossible to compare one business. Let's say one business is paying 70% next to another business that may be only paying 50%. How do you determine as an employee what's the better deal, right? Most people are going to try to go with the practice that's offering more cash. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting all of your other needs met that you might as an employee. So again, if we go back to this idea of how long the practice has been operating, how many employees work for the company, these are really important components to understand before saying yes to that practice that's paying the most money. The next piece here, financial stability and lifestyle needs. So lifestyle is obviously super important, and the number one reason people said that they go into private practice in the first place. And while I respect 100% and believe that people know what they need to make in order to live, that doesn't actually translate to what practice owners can pay. So just because somebody needs to make a certain amount of money doesn't mean that the business owner can necessarily, change their wage structure to accommodate that. So I think this goes back to, how can we better support employees to get a better idea of what amount of money they could make, how realistic it is to build caseloads, all that sort of thing, right? So that employees can make more informed decisions when they're looking for work. Next one is experience and specialization. So this goes back to the limits of small business versus a larger corporation, right? So some practices will offer a bump to certain employees, for getting, like, let's say, you get somatic experiencing certified. Some employers can give a bump for that, but not all are going to be able to, because of, again, the income revenue limitations. If it's a cash pay practice, that is absolutely doable, because it means that the employee just raises their rate for any client that is looking for them. But if it's an insurance-based practice, it's going to be a lot harder to make those changes. Another thing that employees cited that helps them discern fair wages, understanding practice economics, is something that came out. And I'll just say very tenderly that after my follow-up interviews, I determined that this one is actually false confidence of many employees. And I am not saying that every employee doesn't understand what they're talking about. There are probably some out there that do. But unless you really understand what's happening on the financial level of the practice, it's likely that the math is not mathin'. So again, I'll encourage employees to go watch my, and employers too, to watch my Instagram video to get a little bit better understanding. Because the couple of folks that I did speak with, who had cited that they really understood how the practice finances worked, once they watched my video, we were able to talk about the things that they actually hadn't taken into account, what they weren't really thinking about. And so, right. So education really helps here in terms of helping people really understand how practice works. Next one, ethical fairness, ethical consideration and fairness. And this is the heartbreaking part, right? Every employer I know wishes they could do more. And in fact, just this morning, I was meeting with one of my consulting clients who's agonizing over the decision of how much to pay for PTO, right? In Chicago and Chicagoland, actually in Illinois, they just passed a PTO law that every business has to offer PTO to employees, right? And so for many businesses who hadn't been doing that, this is a huge change, and it creates more overhead, which causes a lot of stress for the employer, wanting to make sure that it feels fair and ethical, but also needing to be business minded. And so I hear the complaint and I completely agree with you. And it's just a reminder for employees to go back to look at how the practice finances work to better understand why it is that some practice owners make the decisions that they do. Next one that helps people discern a fair wage, benefits, and learning opportunities. So one theme throughout this survey is that therapists do seem to respond to more benefits as very positive, but they aren't necessarily correlating them with wages. So that's something I think where we can do a little bit of education with employees to help them understand what the benefit package does for them in terms of like how much money is allocated to that. And then last one, work-life balance and benefits. So this is aligned with the lifestyle needs and fairness. And while I know most employers really want to increase wages for these exact reasons, just doesn't mean that the money is there for it, right? So this is a time where I'm hoping that if everybody had a better understanding of how the business worked and employers could have a better understanding of why these are so important to staff, not necessarily making changes, but being able to be in the ick together could actually help move things forward for, I think, employees and owners alike. So next one, preferred pay structure. So the hypothesis among many practice owners is that folks would rather have a salary, but in fact, only a quarter of respondents said that they preferred the salary option. So 23% said they prefer a fixed hourly wage, 32%, so the highest percentage here, said that they would like a percentage split. And then 20% was other, and other included some combination of percentage or fixed hourly or salary mixed in there. This question was about how many sessions do you believe should be required to be considered full-time? This is always a hot topic, and we got answers that were all over the board here. So 34% of people said it should be 20 sessions a week, while 18% said around 21 to 25, and 4% said 26 and above. So 56% of the folks who reported said that they feel that 20 plus sessions a week feels fair. Okay, here's where employees are going to get mad at me. So when we think about wages, we need to compare hours worked to those wages. So since these roles are commission, that means that the money is based on how much money an employee brings in, right? So hours worked, you get the commission on those hours. So when we think about hours worked, let's just use, let's say insurance reimburses $130, right? Let's just say that. And the employee makes 50% commission. We're only going to talk about clinical hours here to start. So I know that they're admin hours, but for right now, just for this exercise, we're just going to think about clinical. So, and if an employee sees 20 clients a week for 48 weeks a year, so that's 4 weeks off a year, that would equal $62,400 for working approximately 20 hours a week. I'm just going to pause with that. $62,400 for working approximately 20 hours a week. If this were a 40-hour a week job, that would double, right, to $124,800 a week. But seeing 40 clients a week is cuckoo bananas. And I really hope there aren't any practice owners out there that are asking staff to do that. So this is the one calculation that leaves a lot of practice owners feeling crazy themselves, because $62,000 sounds pretty great for working a half-time job, right? And again, I know, just bear with me before you get mad. Because I also understand that seeing 20 clients in no way feels like a half-time job, okay? But this is where we have to be honest with what the numbers are, right? So if you are working a salaried hospital job or maybe an IOP, that means you are working a solid 40-hour week, but you might be only making 80K. This is a lifestyle choice, right? Because if you're working 40 hours a week, making 80K, that's actually less hourly than you are making in private practice for working honestly, between 20, 30 hours a week. So this is the lifestyle choice for employees when they're thinking about where they want to work. Would you rather have a higher wage that you can count on every week, but's less money overall? Or would you rather have the more flexible, autonomous option and better work-life balance, but not necessarily take home the same amount that you would at a 40-hour-a-week job? Again, I realize I'm not including admin time. And just a note here, because I see this come up from time to time, any work required needs to be paid, at least according to Illinois law. I don't know about any other states. So you should be being paid if you're an employee for supervision, for staff meetings, for consultation, etc. But I didn't include admin time here because I've yet to see a practice where the admin time is more than a handful of hours per week. So that still keeps the weekly working time under 30 hours, well below 30 hours. So this is the other interesting thing. So technically, to be considered a full-time employee in the US, you're supposed to work 32 hours a week. Practice owners fudge this because in order to offer benefits, it would be super cruel to say, I'm sorry, if you don't see 32 clients a week, you can't be full-time. So this is one of the things that we have to weigh out in our industry. And one reason that the practice revenue minimum requirements almost have to be there because of all of these factors that we're thinking about. So employees, go ahead and at me if you want to and tell me if I am not mathing this correctly. But from my perspective and from what I understand about other practices, this is kind of how I am seeing the landscape. Again, I understand that seeing 20 clients a week does not feel like part-time. And yet we live in this capitalist society that says that it is. And so how do we reckon with the disappointment, the anger, the frustration, everything that comes up when we recognize that this is the situation that we're in? Now let's move to benefits. So what benefits do people want? 25% of folks said that they would like their insurance fully covered. 80% said just having insurance offered and partially covered is awesome. 80% said they would like dental and vision. 85% said they would like sick time and PTO, which is now required in Illinois. 80% said they would like a CEU stipend. So we're seeing here again that education is really important, education and learning. Only 34% said they were interested in bonuses, which I find is interesting. So they would probably rather get higher wages than bonuses. 70% said that they would like a 401k option, and 13% said that they would be interested in childcare subsidies. When I asked, would you be willing to accept less money for more benefits? 46% said maybe. So almost half of folks said maybe, 25% said yes, and then only 29% said no. So this data makes me think that simply helping employees understand the business numbers may help them feel a little bit better about their wages once they realize what the cost of the benefits actually are. And know that even though they might be not seeing the money reflected in their paycheck, they are seeing that money come directly to them. Next question I asked was, Were you prepared for what it was like to work in private practice? And 41.1% said no. 39.3% said kind of, and 19.6% said yes. So I asked this question because I wanted to gauge the respondents' expectations, right? Because I hear over and over how employees have unrealistic expectations for what they believe private practice is going to be like, right? So they think it's going to be really easy, they think, they're just going to have these wonderful, perfect clients, and, their life is going to be just easy breezy, beautiful cover girl. But this is not the case, right? A lot of people you'll see later were asking for help building caseloads, all sorts of things that they don't feel like they're getting support with. So what can practice owners do better to prepare your incoming staff who are coming into private practice for the first time, right? What is it that they need help with so that they can better meet their expectations with what reality is? And here's a little bit of help. First thing that people wanted is help understanding the business and the financial side. A lot of them want to understand the business aspects of the practice, like insurance billing, how to get clients and maintain them, managing the fluctuating income, right? So we as practice owners can educate folks in this area. Next one is clinical preparedness and support. So therapists want training. Over and over again, this was very, very clear. People want the clinical skills. And so how can you support people who are coming, especially ones who are coming directly from grad school, to be better clinically prepared, right? More clinical supervision, more professional development, more coaching can help them feel more effective and confident in their jobs. Next one was realistic job expectations, right? So a lot of respondents said that they felt unprepared for what it was like to build and maintain a caseload. How long it takes for them to be financially stable, right? When people were interviewing for me, I would say it might take you 6 months to build up your practice. I was overestimating how long it would take because I wanted people to be prepared and say, are you going to be okay if you are not getting paid a certain amount up until 6 months? So again, how can practice owners be more transparent in talking about the ebb and flow of referrals and the impact on, clawbacks and typical workload, that sort of stuff? Last one was self-care and work-life balance preparation. So a lot, especially new therapists, is pretty common for them to feel really stressed about what it is like in private practice, right? I've found over the years that not everybody has the capacity for the autonomy and the freedom that comes with private practice. Some people need a more structured environment, and that is totally cool, but private practice might not be the place for them to get that. So I think when interviewing, practice owners can do a better job of letting people know what it's really like for them to work there. Some other things that people brought up is education on contracts or legal issues, networking and peer support, and just general awareness of some predatory practices that some businesses employ. And now we get to the complaints. So what sucks? Actually, let's just think about how we can address these issues, right? So the first one, no surprise, financial compensation. So we've already discussed this a lot. And if you're a practice owner and you haven't shared more info about your practice finances, I would consider doing that so your employees can better understand how it is that their wages fit into the larger picture. The second complaint was workload and job demands. So while I understand from a business perspective that caseload numbers may need to stay where they are, how can you as an employer help your employees find support in building and sustaining their caseloads, right? Maybe it's limiting the number of high acuity clients that they see, or making sure the matching process is working. That's one thing that I've seen with some practices I've consulted with is the intake practices are actually not really supportive of the employees making a good match with their clients. So these are some things that we can think about from a business perspective. Next complaint was management issues. Practice owners, you need help. And if you don't think you need help, I'm especially talking to you. This is where I really began to recognize that employees weren't just blowing smoke up my ass. I've heard a lot of stories that really make me sad and make me really empathize with what some employees have experienced. I have always held the belief, and maybe this is my toxic trait, I always give people the benefit of the doubt. I like to be generous in my assumptions and believe that everybody has their heart in the right place. But as I've become a consultant, I've heard more and more concerning things that make me worry that employers aren't actually looking inward to recognize what needs to shift. So my call to action for every practice owner is to take that honest look at your skills, right? And find support where you don't have the skills. If you've gotten a lot of negative feedback with your employees, it actually might mean that there's something wrong, right? So come to a consultant like me, or I have plenty of other folks I can refer you to, right? Because business owners need leadership training too, because we go into this not because we're brilliant business owners, but because generally we're brilliant clinicians. But being a great clinician doesn't necessarily make one a great leader, right? So please, practice owners, myself and the employees are begging you to take a really honest look at your capacity for management. Okay, next, another doozy, ethical issues in professional environment. So I have heard some bonkers horror stories about insurance fraud or other unethical things that employees have been asked to do. So again, if you don't think this is you, just take a step back and do a self-assessment on what you're asking your employees to do in your practice. Some other concerns are professional growth and support, autonomy and flexibility, workplace culture, and marketing and client acquisition. So these other ones, and most of these actually can be supported by the practice. And maybe if you're a practice owner, you could consider doing an anonymous survey of your staff to find out which of these are the most needed for your employees. Next was, have you brought your concerns to leadership? And if not, why not? And so practice owners, I'm gonna need to take a deep breath here and create some space for self-reflection. So the first issue was perceived communication barriers. So whether we think this is right or not, it's real. And we're going to talk about more about power in a second. But if your staff don't feel like they can come to you, that means that there's work to be done, right? When there's power at play, it's always going to make it harder for people to come to you. So even if you're the nicest human in the world and you're like, why don't my employees talk to me? There's work to be done. The next one is dissatisfaction with the responses. So some employees stop going to owners because they feel like they've expressed their concerns and they either get, no follow through, or they're dismissed, or they're outright ignored, right? So if you're a practice owner and some employee asks you something that you're not able to accommodate, can you still meet them with compassion? Or are you finding yourself getting defensive when somebody brings up concerns or questions, right? If we're defensive, that's not gonna give the employee a lot of confidence that we're actually listening. So we have to be able to regulate ourselves and get out of our own way to be able to meet our employees with compassion. Next, the impact of power dynamics. So I've been training with the Right Use of Power Institute. Absolutely love them, highly recommend. And they say that people with more power have more responsibility to the relationship. So as a practice owner, if something is wonky in the relationship with your employees, the onus is on you to try to make a change. Employees still have responsibility, and employees, I want you to hear this loud and clear, that you actually do have personal power and it is encouraged that you speak up and talk to the owner of your practice, but it is up to the owner to be the one to make the change, right? And make things shift. This next one is good news. It's not all doom and gloom. So successful advocacy, some folks found they were able to talk with their owners and have some success and make some headway. One employee that I talked to had even compiled information about the benefits that were offered at other practices, presented it to her owner, who then was able to make changes to the benefits package. So while some employees feel like they can't talk with their owners, it might be worth giving it a shot because it looks like things can shift. Some other responses, navigating professional and personal risk with personal need, right? Some people fear losing their jobs if they speak up. Other employees said because there's not a formal process for speaking up, they didn't know how to do it. And then another one was having diverse needs, for employees, and then diverse responses for employers. What is the best aspect of group practice, you may ask? Number one was administrative support and reduced admin burdens. We love it. We don't want to do any admin, right? So hooray, employees, for getting all your admin needs met by the practice. The next one was community and peer support. I definitely think this is why people come to group practice and stay at group practice, is because they like to work in community and learn from one another. Flexibility and autonomy was another great aspect. Professional development, people really love group supervision and mentorship, in-house trainings, and stability and security. So having a regular paycheck, not having the high liability, and some sort of stability and consistent caseload, and having the benefits is why people like being in group practice. Next question I asked was, if you were the practice owner, what would you do differently? So these are some areas where practice owners could consider either making changes or providing education and more transparency to staff. So what would you do differently? Number one, enhance transparency and communication. Number two, provide fair compensation and benefits. Number three, focus on professional growth and support. Number four, operational efficiency and organization. Number five, greater autonomy and flexibility. And then number six, we've got a bunch of different things here. Cultural and ethical, cultural and ethical considerations, employee-centric policies, addressing power imbalances, and strategic growth and client matching. So what's interesting here is that autonomy and flexibility ended up on both the slides of what you would do differently and what would you like to stay the same. So this is a good indication to me that there are a good handful of practices that may need to provide a little bit more autonomy, and some have a nice balance. This also probably lends itself to recognizing how employees have different needs. And while they may like more autonomy at one practice, they could actually have more if they were at a different practice. So again, we can't please everyone all of the time, but good to look at these things here. Next one, if you were a practice owner, what would you keep the same? Flexibility and autonomy. Number two, supportive infrastructure. Number three, professional development. Number four, community and social interactions. Number five, pay and benefit structure. So not everybody is disgruntled with their wages. And then finally, the last ones are keeping the same group consultation, diversity and inclusion, and operational and clinical independence. Next question I asked was, what would help the owner increase their trust with you? So this is another area where owners can really take a look at what they can do to build more trust with their team. First one is transparency and open communication. So with transparency, there's a balance. If you've been listening to the Burnt Out Practice Owner series, you've probably heard me talk with several employees about this challenging balance of transparency, because while some people really want to know how the sausage is completely made. Other folks may find a lot of anxiety from knowing about how the sausage is made. So what I would recommend to owners is that transparency doesn't mean that you have to share every single detail with folks. There's so many reasons why that wouldn't be worthwhile or appropriate, but there are definitely places where you can help your staff understand why you've made certain decisions. And that can help them get a better sense of the bigger picture. Support and acknowledgement. So how can you help make sure your employees have what they need to be successful and they feel supported? Do they need more coaching? Do they need, I don't know, more resources? One cool option from a practice that I know, they have a bio writing workshop for new clinicians. So it helps them craft a meaningful bio that can go on the group website and on Psychology Today. So that might seem like a little thing that you would think would be obvious, but these little things can actually go a long way with staff. Next one is professional development and training. Your people want to learn. So what can you do to give them more opportunities to do that? Next was inclusive and fair management practices. So we've talked a lot about how fairness is sort of in the eye of the beholder, and practice owners, you're never going to be able to do everything right. But again, this is where transparency can help you walk employees through decision-making processes to better help them understand how you've come to the solution that you've come to. Other ways that owners can increase trust is feedback mechanisms. Giving people consistent ways to share feedback for what they do and don't like. Consistency and reliability. This is a big one. And practice owners really need to be honest with themselves about how much work they're putting on their plate. I was a very big culprit of not being consistent and reliable for my staff because I was doing too many things. Next one is organizational efficiency. So this goes back to potentially hiring a consultant to help you make the organization function in a more efficient way, right? What are the policies and procedures and structures that help employees feel like they know what's going on? And then the last piece was empathy and understanding. So again, when employees are meeting you with a problem, can you hold empathy for them instead of reacting defensively? This next one is, what was some friendly advice that you would have for your practice owner? So I made a beautiful little word cloud here. Some things that were listed were getting leadership training, holding office hours, pausing growth, listening, asking for help. The biggest one, aligning with your values, making sure you practice what you preach. Be reliable. I snuck in here, one person wrote, don't be a dick. And I highly agree. Pay us more, transparent communication, and asking for feedback. And this question, would you consider owning your own group practice? I found this one fascinating. 34% said yes, 38% said maybe, and only 29% said no. So that means overwhelmingly, employees who are in group practice now are thinking that they could potentially want to own a practice someday. And I'll just tell you a little story. Gather around, children. Not too long ago, I had a consultation call with a potential group practice owner who wanted to seek consultation. And they said that they started their practice because they had been an employee at a group practice before and knew that they could do better. But once they started their practice, they had a really rude awakening of just how hard it was. And they had had a fantasy that was going to be way easier than it is in actuality. So I shared that story with you, not to say you can't run a group practice or don't do it, but if you're somebody who's considering running a practice, I want you to be informed. So one of the ways that you can do that is have a bunch of informational interviews and gather more information to really, really understand what it is that you would be getting into if you decide to start a group practice. And if you're starting something from, a sort of, I don't know, like place of, oh, I can do this better than somebody else, while that might be true, you might not have all the info that you need to really be successful at it. And not just be successful, but be sane and successful. So I asked these next questions because I personally feel that right now we're in a really specific time that's impacting not only how employees feel, but also how owners feel. And there's always an ebb and flow, right? As long as there have been employers and employees, the pendulum can swing from one side to the other. And the data that I have here showed me that employees are also aware that what's happening around them is influencing how they feel at work. So how much do these other issues influence your feelings about group practice? I asked about the state of the economy, politics, and healthcare, and 33% said somewhat, 31% said moderately, and 20% said extremely. So a lot of folks recognize that the state of our economics, politics, and healthcare are really impacting how they feel. Marginalized identities. So I asked that if people identified as white, straight, cisgender, and so on, that they choose not much. And so that's why I think we got 36% of not much, because I'm assuming that those are straight, white, cisgendered women. 20% said extremely, 18% said moderately, 16% said somewhat, and 11% said slightly. So I'm guessing that most of the people who are people of color or queer or trans or whatnot recognize that their marginalized identity is influencing the way that they feel that they're being treated at their practice. Next one was labor strikes in other industries. We had, looks like 45% said somewhat, 9% said extremely, 11% said moderately, 18% said slightly. So we can see here that overwhelmingly most people recognize that the labor strikes happening in other areas influence the way that they feel. And then the last question was your newness in the field. And 21% or 27% said extremely, 21% said moderately, 21% somewhat, 18% slightly, and 13% not that much. So it seems like a lot of people recognize that their newness in the field might be impacting them somewhat. And then the last question I asked was, what didn't I miss? What didn't I ask that needs to be addressed? And we got 9 items here. First one, power dynamics and ethical concerns. I didn't explicitly say anything about power dynamics because I was curious how many people were going to bring it up, but this is the number one thing that employees wanted to talk about that I didn't ask. So again, visit Right Use of Power Institute's website, sign up for one of their trainings. They're super amazing, and understanding how power works in group practice can go a long way for employers. Number 2, supporting major life events. So again, I think meeting employees with empathy and compassion is really important to them. 3, racial and ethnic diversity challenges. So making sure that as an employer, if you are not doing your anti-racism work, that might be negatively impacting, and I'm just going to say not your racial and ethnically diverse staff, but it might be impacting your staff as a whole. Supervision and professional development. So we've already seen throughout this presentation that your people want to learn. They want supervision, they want the professional development. So how can you create that for them? Number 5, exploitation of inexperienced clinicians. I do think that employers can do a better job of being more transparent about what it's really like to be in private practice and helping sort of burst that bubble for newer clinicians, thinking that this is going to be the end-all be-all, a panacea for them. Number 6, marketing and client acquisition. This came up over and over and over again, that more people want support with these things. And so as a practice owner, how can you put that in place? Number 7, contractual and transition issues. So I'm guessing this is related to when people leave the practice, right? So at this time that I'm recording this, We are no longer able to enforce non-compete clauses. So if you've ever even considered having a non-compete clause, you are not allowed to do that. As a practice owner, how do you support people in transitioning? The sad truth of being a group practice owner means you will constantly have revolving staff. It's not because you're a terrible practice owner or a terrible business owner. It's because this is the nature of the business. It makes so much sense that people will want to start in private practice and get their sea legs, and then potentially when they feel like they know what they're doing, go off and start their own practice. That is a normal developmental stage for any clinician. And the more that practice owners can like get okay and center in that is just the way that the practice might work, it's going to be easier to transition people out. Number 8, ableism in private practice. So how can we take a look at some of the policies and procedures to be able to support people who have divergent needs? And number 9, general treatment of employees. So again, making sure that you are actually thinking about the employees as humans and not just people who are bringing in money. So what do we do with this information, my friends? It's time to rise up and demand change. The status quo is no longer acceptable. This is a quote from Maya Angelou, and I say this full well knowing that I do think we're in a really specific time of group practice and the evolution of therapy practice in general, but I think it's time for some changes. So if we look at what's not working, employees are feeling generally underpaid, undervalued, and undersupported. A lot of practice owners I talk to are feeling underappreciated and overwhelmed. And then we have these external circumstances like polarization, late stage capitalism, racism, transphobia. All of these continue to increase the demands on our mental health workers. I think we need a revolution in group practice. So what if we could build an environment that feels supportive and equitable to employees, feels fulfilling and enlivening for practice owners, supports the development of every clinician at the practice, supports equitable and sustainable business practices, aligns with anti-oppression and liberatory values, and increases the consciousness of the profession and the group practice landscape? Let's do it. I think together we can create change, and I'm offering you the Group Practice Revolution. So what is Group Practice Revolution? It's a platform I am in the process of building right now with the intent to revolutionize the group practice landscape by building a foundation of inherent belongingness and relational consciousness, resulting in a culture of connection between group practice employers and employees. By centering values like abundance, authenticity, liberation, compassion, and commitment to self-growth, Group Practice Revolution is going to help you walk the walk, not just talk the talk. What's going to be included in the platform is an emergency consultation hotline where you can discuss business questions with experienced consultants. I'm going to have a Group Practice Revolution podcast where you can hear conversations with other industry leaders and visionaries who are paving the way for new ideas. We're going to have a strengths-based social platform. I don't know about you, but I am tired of the anonymous posts on Facebook. I want to create a private social platform that centers curiosity, abundance, and mutual support. And speaking of support, there will also be support groups. You're going to be able to find connection and understanding in monthly support groups for employees, one for practice owners, and then also one for mixed groups. And lastly, live training webinars and a video library. So we're going to talk about topics like power dynamics, financial health and capitalism, self and collective care, and more. What will this cost, you might ask? Well, I've got two different tiers. There's going to be a revolutionary membership that includes all of the offerings I just talked about. And this will be available for both practice owners and employees for $47 a month. And then we have an evolutionary membership at $19 a month that includes only the hotline and the podcast. And only employees will be able to take advantage of the evolutionary membership. So in conclusion, we cannot change our external circumstances, right? I mean, we can do everything that we can to fight for change in the future, but in general, we're not going to be able to move these as quickly as we want to or we need to. But we can control how we engage in the group practice landscape. I truly have high hopes for us as therapists to be able to bring more consciousness, not only to our profession, but to build capacity in our clients to better tolerate the challenges that are happening in the world that we're living in today. So if you want to hear more about Group Practice Revolution, I'd love for you to join the wait list. You can go to headheartbiztherapy.com/group-practice-revolution. www.headhearttherapy. Let me say that again. www.headheartbiztherapy.com/group-practice-revolution. Put your name on the wait list. I'm hoping it comes out early 2025. So that's it, my friends. If you have any questions, any concerns, anything you want to fight about, I'm here for it. I'm totally here to be challenged. I don't believe that I have all of the information, but I'm hoping that what I shared with you today has helped you in some way. And you can find me at headheartbiztherapy.com or on Instagram or Facebook or YouTube at Head Heart Biz Therapy. Until next time, my friends, thank you so much.